Okay, did you get it up to the...
Where do we leave off at?
Oh, we were at the police department where they shot up everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's a beautiful morning.
Look who's here! Look who's here! It's my two favorite people in the world.
Hello, camera kid.
Hi!
Love you. Mwah.
Hi, Betty.
Hi, sweetie. Oh, I love you.
I love you too.
I'm so glad to see you.
Me too. You guys look nice. Where'd you just come from?
We went to see the Pink Ladies today.
The what?
The Pink Ladies who's been praying for Grandpa all this time. Hello, hello, hello.
My grandma, the Eskimo.
This is something, ain't it?
Let's go mush you huskies. On, King! They spent 6 months killing everybody off.
And they're on an island.
So everybody on Days of Our Lives now is dead.
No. They're on an
Jack is dead.
island. No, they're on an island.
For what purpose?
And
Well,
they,
we don't know.
they
And I
slipped
haven't
it.
got to watch it
they
almost 2
slipped
weeks
them a
now.
Mickey.
I would like to recognize a very special Love couple over here. Todd and Betty, yes? Celebrating their 50th anniversary. Betty said it's been 8 of the best years of her life.
This is my favorite photo of my grandma. She's on a train, staring out a window. My best guess is that this was taken sometime in the 80s, based on the depth of her wrinkles. Mom tells me it was taken on a trip out west to see Betty's brother in Colorado. I assume Grandpa took it. She doesn't seem to know that she's being photographed, which are my favorite type of photographs because you are raw and unfiltered and exposed without knowing it, as close to capturing someone's essence as possible. I love the mystery in this photo. What is she looking at? What is she thinking? What is Grandpa thinking behind the camera? Who is this woman? Unadorned in her trademark look of sweatshirt, short hair, and no makeup. Betty, as I always called her, to her face and to others with a playful wink that said familiarity and friendship beyond the barriers of generations and respect, ironically was a stranger to me. As close as we were, I feel I didn't know her in the way that I know Mom or even the way that I knew Grandpa. As you get older, in theory, your parents and maybe even your aunts and your uncles become real people. You share real feelings and fears and failures, but there is something about the relationship between a grandparent and a grandchild that a large part of you is locked in at about 10 years old, where everything is a game and a good time, and the air tastes like the glorious char on her chocolate chip cookies. We shared intimate things. Nothing is more intimate than death, and we shared that twice. But while Todd and I discussed politics and religion and American history, music, tales from his childhood, for the most part, Betty and I kept it at the surface. Soap operas, movie plots, recipes, family drama, nothing that required deep connection or deep thought. But there's one thing I did get out of her over one of our dozens of canasta games and rounds of double solitaire. Betty once had dreams of being a mystery writer, which almost made me fall out of my chair when she told me. A woman to that point I had never seen read anything other than the TV guide a day in her life wanted to be Jessica Fletcher. This made me feel close to her, bonded in a way that I didn't know that we could be, but also sad for her. A woman who quit school in the 8th grade to go work in a dress factory and make shrouds for dead people to help support her family. In later years, She did become an avid reader, lighting up like a little kid when she'd unwrap the stack of books she'd asked for at Christmas time, an expression on her face usually reserved for getting the biggie in Yahtzee. I didn't want to go. In fact, once I found out that her death was not imminent, but that she was going on hospice, I thought about canceling my flight home. Mom was horrified that I'd rather come home for her funeral than be with her while she was still alive. And I went even further, telling her and my father that I didn't want to, no, I didn't need to, see Betty ever again. My last visit with her was great. We did a puzzle. We played bingo at the nursing home where she won $1 and gave it to me. I told her I loved her and even told her I loved her again on the phone the day Mom called me in tears that Betty had been rushed to the hospital and they weren't sure if she was going to make it, causing me to purchase the flight that I eventually considered canceling. Mom made me promise that when it was her turn in the bed, she would not be left to die alone. I assured her I would be there for her at the end, a fear I assume was brought out by her grief, and that I would see her tomorrow. I didn't want to go because I knew that it would be extremely messy and emotionally unpleasant. As intrigued and obsessed as I am with death, I'm terrified by the actual process, the slow wasting away of a human life. The journey that no matter what happens or who is there to hold your hand, you will go it alone. In truth, Betty, Grandma, had died years ago. Or at least the safe, comfortable, fun Grandma had died when Grandpa slowly but all of a sudden passed away. No more late night snacks, no more trips to Denny's, no more canasta games, no more movie marathons, no more Wii bowling tournaments, no more warm bookends to frame my childhood forever, because Grandpa was gone. Their house was gone. And a large part of her had gone with him. Our relationship would never be the same, and for me, it was easier to just pretend that they had both died instead of reckoning with what it meant to be without one of them, without the other. My hope was to sweep in for the funeral, have some good cries, and get everything out in a controlled, finite time period. Clean, easy, as I had done for Grandpa. But death is not clean, nor easy. My hesitance to come home was selfish. There's no other word for it. I didn't want to constantly be on the verge of tears. I didn't want to hold her hand and watch her die. And I didn't know how to handle my mother's inevitable breakdown, who at 58 was now going to be an orphan. But none of that, I learned, mattered. I could and should do these things for Betty and Mom. Two women who have never asked much of me and from whom I have taken very much. I owed it to both of them to be there, to ease the pain, to shoulder the burden, to guide through the dark, and to share the love and compassion that I'd been given by these women with them when they needed someone more than ever. Dying must be terrifying and lonely and confusing, especially for someone with dementia, constantly searching for someone familiar to latch onto when their entire life seems to be erased behind them, like the broom in Alice in Wonderland that sweeps up behind Alice, so when she turns around, her tracks are gone, and she's lost in the woods with no idea how to get out. She was thrilled to see me, and I her. She was hilarious, telling us stories about this ranch she supposedly owned, complete with horses and cows and big dogs and sexy farmhands. She was heartfelt, telling me how happy she was that Stephen and I had found partners that were such a good match for us. She was devastatingly earnest when she looked at me and said, "I have no one anymore." How lonely that must be to know that the man you loved for over 60 years is not here to hold you in your greatest hours of need. She was childlike, yet the most womanlike I've ever known her to be. She looked at me and told me how much my mom needed support right now. Perhaps the only true maternal ask I'd ever heard from her. And how grateful she was to have Mom there for her through all of this. The last 6 years of her life, Betty and Mom had finally become friends. Best friends. Which felt so good to know after all they'd been through. She had hurt her leg, bruised it somehow. No fracture, nothing too serious, but she had no idea how it had gotten there, as shocked as we were to see a purple welt on her right shin, before laying back down, unfazed. I learned that dying gives you this freedom to be void of vanity, void of pride, to say what you need and just do what you feel. Yet helpless to do anything without someone else. She deduced that the bruise must have happened when she was being chased the previous night. She made Mom and I promise that the next time we would run with her. We said we would. There was a time she thought she was an FBI agent, keeping vigil at the front door, guarding the nursing home from spies. Once she said that aliens were taking her up in their ship, and Mom said, "Now be careful, next time they might probe you." To which Betty said, without skipping a beat, "That'd be all right." I loved sharing this little moment with her, to see her at this most unfettered, to see that playful grin when she knows she's being naughty and knows that I get a kick out of her naughtiness. What went through her mind as she lied there day after day, in and out of consciousness? Did she remember the smell of Grandpa's morning breath? The way his hand felt in hers? The sound of his laughter or his cough that shook the house? The way the words, "I love you," hit her ears when he'd whisper them? This must be the cruelest act of all. To lose your love, lose his memory, and then lose yourself. On a continuum of fits and starts, good days and bad, flashes of birthdays, vacations, fights, sexual escapades, midnight snacks, playing with the dog, the taste of your last cigarette, the knowledge of regret, the absence of future. The last time I saw her, I held her hand and I watched her sleep. Her skin smelled, ironically, like a newborn. Its consistency was loose and smooth and beautiful. Even its bruises and moles and wrinkles. So many wrinkles. All adding up to a life lived. Battle scars. Proof that she had survived to this moment. There's a beauty in the signs of age, this serenity in knowing that no matter how we live, what we achieve, who we love, or where we wind up, we all go through a similar series of steps to embrace our expiration. I sat in Grandpa's chair and stroked her hair. That comforting sensation that takes us all back to childhood. I shook her shoulder and called her name, hoping that she could see me and I could see her one more time before I left for the airport. But she remained asleep. I leaned in, put my head on her pillow next to hers, and whispered her name. She did not stir, only continued her shallow breaths. Was she dreaming? Was she being chased? Was she on her ranch? Was she at her kitchen table on the phone with Virginia? Was she in Grandpa's arms? Was she floating, clutching at anything familiar? Or was she trying to fly, reaching for the stars to set her free? I kissed her on her forehead. I thanked her, and I told her I loved her. I grabbed Dad, and I cried. Told her I loved her again, and I left. She died 2 weeks later. The staff and the other residents at the nursing home lined the halls when they wheeled her out. I had no idea she was so loved, but I'm glad. Her last words were, "My daughter." I think back to that picture on the train, and there's so many questions I still want to ask that woman staring out the window. So many things I wish I knew about her, like what did she think of her parents? Did she think she was a good mom? What was her favorite song? Where'd she always want to go? What smell filled her with passion? When was the moment she was most happy? What would she have done differently if she had the chance? What did she think was her best quality? Who did she see when she looked in the mirror? Was she vain? Why was she so damned stubborn? What was the most rebellious thing she ever did? I wish I had asked her these things. Despite all the things that I didn't know, here's what I know about Betty Ann Pecar West. She'd start her days with a cup or two of black coffee, her breakfast consisting of cookies dunked therein, and the occasional banana for good measure. She loved bowling, almost went pro, and was a master at the Wii bowling. Showing me the way to get strikes was to flick your wrist in the final moment. She was a goofball, never afraid to say and do ridiculous things for the camera. She loved attention. She had horrible back problems and would move couches or trek up and down the basement stairs, in part so she could complain about it and get people to feel sorry for her. She rarely open-mouthed smiled in photos because she was self-conscious about not having any teeth. She hated wearing her dentures because they were too big for her mouth. Sometimes she would wear them, and yes, complain about it, but most of the time she just said screw it and left them out. You always knew that it was a special day, and one where photos were probably going to be taken when she had them in. Because of her toothless mouth, she would whistle through her gums while playing solitaire or doing the dishes or just shuffling around the house in those pink flip-flops that should have been thrown out years ago. She preferred chocolate ice cream to vanilla, liked her pizza thin and crispy, and loved KFC coleslaw. As a child, and as a 65-year-old, she ate cold pork and beans out of the can, a nostalgic flash to the depression and the poverty of her youth. She cooked food longer than necessary, a bonus for the spaghetti in the pewter pot she would make every time I came home, and a downfall for the Thanksgiving turkey that inevitably was dry as sand. Halloween was our special day, and she always bought the king-size candy bars. She and Grandpa both sipped water all day, every day, out of liter-sized plastic jugs. She kept a vintage saltine tin stocked with crackers for my visits, with a giant jar of Jif, orange soda, and drumsticks always within reach. She created a handwritten catalog of all her movies, each with a unique number taped on the spine. Mom and I called it Betty's Videos, and would check out titles from her expansive collection. As kids, she took Stephen and me to Dye's Movie Company, and we would have all-night movie marathons of horror films. We'd fight who got to sleep on the lumpy pull-out couch with her, Stephen usually winning, while Jerry Springer played in the background. She volunteered for the Red Cross. She was religious, but she was never preachy. She'd answer the phone while on the toilet because old people can get away with anything. She would cheat at Scrabble by making up words or looking through the dictionary for things that started with the letter Q. Sometimes Grandpa and I would let it go. Other times we called her on her bullshit. She lived in sweatsuits. At the nursing home, her friend Lupe was trying to hook her up with one of the residents, yet Betty always called herself a married woman, even years after she wasn't. She slept every night with the TV on. She loved Neil Diamond music. She thought Chuck Norris was sexy. She struggled to breathe. She never thought she'd live to be as old as she did. And there was never a single moment that I spent with her she didn't make me feel special and loved and happy to be right where I was.
Hey, Grandma? Grandma? Are those cookies you made, are those for this weekend, or can I have a couple?
You can have them as many as you want. Go ahead and eat them.
Wonderful. I love you.
Eat all you want, and I love you.
Mwah.